Hello? I had never been a jealous man, at least not before all of this started. But something inside me began to crack. I'd catch little things here and there, her phone face down, her strange hours at work, the constant distance between us. It wasn't a big thing at first, just a hunch. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my wife, Rachel, was slipping away. Maybe it was the way she started dressing differently, or how she'd need some space to go out with friends more often. And when I'd ask her what was going on, she'd say, "You're just overthinking things." I tried to ignore it, but then I found something. It was an email, one that was supposed to be deleted, but somehow I stumbled upon it one night when I was using her laptop. The subject line was just a name, Jason. I didn't know who Jason was, but the email thread? That was a different story. They were talking about meeting up, about how much they missed each other. And there was this line: "We can't keep doing this, but I don't want to stop." I was hit with a wave of disbelief. What the hell was going on? I thought I was just paranoid, but now there was this proof that something was happening, something I hadn't been aware of. I confronted Rachel, and as I expected, she denied it. "It's nothing," she said, her voice trembling just enough to make my stomach twist. "Jason is a work colleague. You're being ridiculous." But I knew. My gut was screaming at me that I was right. Yet I stayed calm. Too calm. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. My work wasn't helping either. I'd been under pressure for months, endless meetings, last-minute deadlines, trying to keep my team on track. And the stress? It didn't stay at work. It followed me home. I'd come back late, tense, exhausted, hoping for a quiet dinner and maybe, just maybe, some comfort from my wife. But Rachel? She'd be too tired to talk, too stressed to even look at me. So, the silence grew louder. The distance between us felt suffocating. I could feel her pulling away. The once comforting weight of her presence was now a hollow absence. And the worst part? She blamed me. Always. If I was frustrated, it was my fault. If I didn't call her enough during the day, it was my fault. She would turn every complaint into a reason to belittle me, to make me feel like I was the one doing something wrong. That night, I was at my breaking point. My head was spinning, work was a mess, my marriage felt like it was crumbling, and I hadn't had a single moment of peace in what felt like forever. So, I did something impulsive. Something I knew I probably shouldn't have. I went to a bar. Now, I don't drink much. I'm not the type to drown my problems in alcohol. But I needed to get out. I needed to escape, even if it was just for a couple of hours. The bar was dimly lit, full of people looking to forget their own troubles. I slid onto a stool, ordered a whiskey, and tried to clear my mind. That's when I saw her. She was sitting at the far end of the bar, alone. Her posture was confident, yet there was something fragile about her, something that told me she was dealing with her own storm. She had this elegance about her, dark hair, sharp eyes that were tired, but still sharp. She seemed out of place in a way that caught my attention. I don't know what it was, but I felt drawn to her. I didn't want to stare, but I couldn't help myself. She wasn't like the other women in the bar. There was something almost sad about her. And then it happened. She looked at me. Not just a glance, but a look. A gaze that lingered for a moment too long. I quickly turned my head, pretending not to notice. But I could feel her eyes on me. Maybe it was the whiskey in my system, or maybe it was just the desperate need for any kind of human connection, but I found myself getting up and walking over to her. "Are you okay?" I asked. I wasn't expecting a response, but it felt like the right thing to say. She looked at me for a moment, and then, with a slight shake of her head, she said, "No, I'm not." We talked. She told me her name was Lily, and when I asked why she was sitting alone, she didn't hesitate to tell me. "My husband," she said. "He got drunk and kicked me out. Told me I was worthless, that I was nothing. I don't know why I stayed so long." She had that defeated look in her eyes, the kind I recognized all too well. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that things would get better. But I couldn't help but feel a strange kind of connection to her, maybe because, in some weird way, we were both drowning. Both broken in our own ways. We kept talking for hours, the alcohol loosening our tongues, and somewhere along the way, I stopped thinking about my wife, stopped thinking about work. It was just Lily and me, two people searching for something, anything, to hold on to in the chaos. When the night ended, she asked me if I wanted to come back to her place. I hesitated, but then, in a split-second decision, I nodded. I followed her to her car. And just like that, I was about to cross a line I never thought I'd cross. What I didn't know, what neither of us knew, was that Lily's husband had his own secrets. And those secrets would come crashing into my life sooner than I could have imagined. But for now, I was lost in the moment. And I didn't care. Lily's apartment was modest but cozy, far from the lavish places my wife, Rachel, and I used to talk about when we dreamed of a different life. There was a sense of vulnerability in the way she lived, a sort of quiet sadness that wrapped itself around the small rooms. I noticed it immediately, the way the place was just empty. There were no pictures on the walls, no little mementos, just sparse furniture and a feeling of abandonment that clung to everything. She led me inside, and for a brief second, I almost felt like I was stepping into another life, one where things weren't so complicated, where everything wasn't falling apart. She didn't say much, just offered me a drink, which I accepted without thinking. We sat down on the couch, and she looked at me with a vulnerability that felt almost intimate. I didn't know her, but in that moment I felt like we understood each other in a way I hadn't felt in years with Rachel. As the night wore on, the distance between us disappeared. She kissed me, and it wasn't the clumsy, rushed type of kiss that happens when people are trying to force something. No, this kiss was different. It was slow, deliberate, as if she was trying to find some kind of solace in it, just like I was. It wasn't just physical. It was two people who needed something from each other, something raw and real. And then, we slept together. I'm not proud of it, but I won't lie to you, there was something liberating about it. It was like I could breathe again, like all the tension and frustration from my failed marriage, from the work pressure, from the constant feeling of being invisible in my own life, all of that melted away in that moment. She wasn't Rachel. She wasn't my wife who constantly belittled me or blamed me for everything. Lily just was, and in that simplicity, there was relief. But I wasn't thinking clearly. I wasn't thinking about the consequences. I wasn't thinking about Rachel or what this could do to my already crumbling life. The next few days felt like a haze. I'd wake up next to Lily, feeling the weight of her body against mine, and for a few hours, it felt like I was living someone else's life. It was a temporary escape. That's all it was. Every time I went back to my apartment, I was greeted by the same cold silence. Rachel didn't even notice when I came and went. She was too caught up in her own world, doing whatever it was she did that made her feel fulfilled. But there was something unsettling about the way she behaved. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that she was hiding something. Then, one evening, as I was walking back into my apartment after another night with Lily, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Rachel. She was being unusually distant, which was saying a lot because she'd always been distant. "We need to talk when you get home." I didn't reply immediately. I wasn't in the mood for a confrontation, not tonight. I had just spent the last few hours wrapped up in something that felt good, something that took me out of the rut of my own mind. But as I put my keys into the lock and stepped inside, I saw Rachel sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes fixed on something in her hands. "Did you think I wouldn't notice?" she asked, her voice low, almost too calm. I froze, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" She looked up, her eyes cold. "I know about you and Lily." I stared at her, confused. How could she know? Was she watching me? Did she know everything? "You've been seeing her behind my back," Rachel said, her lips curling into a bitter smile. "You think I'm stupid? I've been watching you." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The truth was, I didn't even know what to say. I had been so wrapped up in my own anger and resentment that I didn't even realize how far gone we were. Rachel had seen the signs, maybe not the emails, but she could feel the distance. She could feel me slipping away, and she wasn't about to let me go without a fight. "I've been giving you space," she continued, "but this is the last straw." Her voice cracked, and for a moment I thought I saw something real in her eyes, a flicker of hurt. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the same icy tone she always used when she was trying to control me. "I'm done," I muttered, my mind spinning. I don't know why I said it. Maybe I was tired of pretending, tired of fighting a battle I didn't even care about anymore. I walked out of the apartment, feeling like a ghost. I went straight to Lily's place, no questions asked. But as I walked into her apartment, something felt different. She wasn't there when I arrived, but her phone was on the coffee table, buzzing. I looked at it, and for some reason, I picked it up. I wasn't proud of what I did next. I opened her messages. And there it was. A message from Jason, the same Jason I had seen in Rachel's emails. I froze. Lily's husband. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Jason wasn't just some random guy. He was the same man who had been involved with Rachel, the man who had been screwing my wife. And here I was, sitting in his wife's apartment, sharing her bed. It felt like a cruel joke, a twisted, sick twist of fate. Before I could process it, I heard the door open. Lily walked in, and when she saw me holding her phone, her face drained of color. She knew I'd seen it. She knew I knew. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat down on the couch, her hands shaking. "Lily," I said, my voice low, full of something I couldn't place. "You and Jason, he's my wife's lover, isn't he?" Her eyes welled up with tears, and for the first time, I saw the full extent of the pain in her. She didn't deny it. She didn't try to hide it. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know. But now it feels like everything is falling apart." And just like that, my world spun further out of control. I wasn't just tangled up in my own mess anymore. I was tangled in hers too. And the worst part? I couldn't seem to get out of it. I couldn't walk away. But the game was changing. It wasn't just about me and Rachel anymore. Now, there were two players in this twisted mess, two men who were both being played by the same woman. And revenge? It wasn't going to come from me. It was going to come from him. I wish I could say I walked out of that apartment, cleared my head, and made some sense of the chaos I was living in. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there on Lily's couch, holding her phone, feeling the weight of everything I'd just discovered. There I was, caught in a web of lies, betrayal, and twisted connections that I couldn't untangle. Lily's tears were like a silent echo to the pain I'd been carrying, and in some messed up way, it felt like we were both drowning in the same ocean of regret. Lily wasn't saying much, just staring at the floor, biting her lip as if she were trying to hold back everything she wanted to say. I wasn't sure if she was waiting for me to comfort her or for me to explode in anger, but I didn't do either. I just sat there in stunned silence. "Jason didn't tell me about you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know he was married to your wife. I don't know what's worse," I muttered under my breath. "Finding out my wife's been sleeping with your husband, or the fact that you're both lying to each other." She flinched at my words. Her eyes flickered with guilt, and I could see that she was trying to hold it all together, but it was clear that the weight of everything was suffocating her. "Don't you get it?" she said, her voice cracking. "I'm just as much a victim here as you are. Jason, he's a bastard. He used me. Just like your wife used you." I wasn't sure what to say to that. Was I supposed to comfort her? Apologize for the mess that we both had gotten ourselves into? No. That wasn't going to happen. "What are we going to do now?" I asked, my voice tight with frustration. The whole situation felt like a bad dream, one I couldn't wake up from. Lily hesitated for a moment before answering. "I don't know. I thought maybe I could escape all this, but now I don't even know who I can trust anymore." The sadness in her voice made my stomach churn. But deep down, I knew something had shifted in me. The anger that had been bubbling under the surface for months, years even, was starting to claw its way out. I couldn't stand the idea of being manipulated, of being the fool in this twisted love triangle. And just like that, a plan started forming in my mind. The next few days were a blur. I went to work, pretending everything was normal, while the weight of everything else pressed down on me like a ton of bricks. Rachel and I didn't speak much after that night. She was avoiding me, but I could see the guilt in her eyes when she glanced at me, like she was too proud to apologize, too arrogant to admit that she had been caught. But something in me had changed. I wasn't angry at her anymore. Not in the way I used to be. I was just numb. Detached. Maybe that's what happens when you've been deceived for so long, when you realize that everything you thought you had was a lie. Then, one evening, after another round of strained silence between Rachel and me, I decided to go to a bar again. Not to drown my sorrows, not to escape, but because I couldn't be in that apartment anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. I didn't expect to see Lily there. I didn't expect anything, really, but there she was, sitting at the bar, looking out of place in a crowd of rowdy men and women. Her eyes met mine the moment I walked in. I almost walked away. But I didn't. There was something magnetic about her, something that pulled me in, even though I knew it was a terrible idea. "You came," she said, her lips curling into a small, weary smile. "I didn't know where else to go," I replied, sinking onto the stool next to her. "What are you doing here?" She sighed, her fingers playing with the rim of her glass. "Trying to figure out what the hell is wrong with me, I guess." I didn't respond. I just ordered a drink and sat there, both of us caught in a silence that was comfortable in its own strange way. Neither of us knew what we were doing, but for some reason, it felt like this was the only thing that made sense. After everything that had happened, we were both living in this gray space, trying to make sense of a world that was spinning out of control. And then, just when I thought the night was going to pass without incident, the door opened, and in walked a man. He wasn't tall, but he had this aggressive presence about him. The moment he entered the bar, the energy shifted. People cleared a path for him as he made his way to the counter, his eyes fixed on Lily. "Jason." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The man who had been sleeping with my wife, the man who was Lily's husband, was standing right in front of me. For a split second, I thought about leaving, about walking out of that bar and never looking back. But I didn't. I stayed. Lily looked up at him, and there was something strange in her gaze, almost like she was frightened of him. She didn't stand up, didn't even acknowledge him directly. Jason walked up to her, his face red with anger, his jaw clenched tight. "What the hell are you doing here?" Jason's voice was low, but it carried. People around us started to notice. Lily didn't answer him right away. She just took a long drink from her glass, her eyes avoiding his. "You're drunk," she said flatly. "Damn right I'm drunk," Jason snapped, his hand slamming onto the counter. "You think you can just waltz out of our home? You think you can cheat on me with that guy?" His eyes finally locked onto me, and the anger in them was clear. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I didn't say anything at first. I didn't need to. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lily stood up slowly, her face pale. "Jason, stop. Just stop." But it was too late. Jason was already past the point of no return. He reached out, grabbing her by the arm, pulling her toward him with enough force that she stumbled. My heart raced. I stood up before I even realized what I was doing. "Hey, you need to back off," I said, my voice colder than I expected. Jason turned to face me, a sneer forming on his lips. "And what? You're gonna play the hero? You're just as pathetic as she is." Before I could react, he shoved me. Not hard, but just enough to throw me off balance. The crowd around us went silent, but no one moved to intervene. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, the same anger that had been building for months, years even. The frustration I'd been swallowing for so long came to the surface. But I wasn't thinking clearly. And in that moment, either was Jason. It was the beginning of something much darker than either of us could have anticipated. The night was just getting started. The shove from Jason wasn't just physical, it was a spark. A trigger. A way to let all the months of frustration, betrayal, and self-loathing finally bubble over. My hand shot out instinctively, pushing him back hard, far harder than I meant to. He staggered, bumping into the nearby bar stools, nearly knocking one over. The bar fell into a stunned silence, but for some reason, the sound of my heart thudding in my ears drowned everything else out. I didn't know what came over me. 1 second, I was just trying to stand up for Lily, who now looked terrified, and the next, I was ready to start a fight with this guy who was as much a part of my misery as Rachel. Jason regained his footing, his face twisting in fury. "You think you can touch me and get away with it?" he spat, his voice so full of venom that it made me shiver. "You're lucky I don't make you regret this." I stepped forward, my fists clenching, but Lily got between us, her hands raised in a defensive gesture, pushing me back. "Enough, both of you!" she yelled, her voice shaking but commanding enough to stop us both dead in our tracks. I hadn't seen her like this before, so sure of herself, so desperate to defuse the situation. But Jason wasn't backing down. "Stay out of this, Lily," he growled. "This is between me and him. He's the reason you left me. He's the one you've been spending time with behind my back, isn't he?" I didn't even have time to process his words before Jason was turning on Lily, his face darkening with rage. "You want to leave me for some random guy? Huh? Is that it?" Lily flinched, her hands still held out as if she could keep the world at bay with them. "Jason, please. I didn't leave you for him. But Jason wasn't listening. His eyes locked on me again, and I could see the hate in them, burning bright. He stepped toward me, his fists clenched at his sides, but this time, I didn't back down. I was done backing down. My hands were shaking with anger, with frustration, with a sense of injustice that had been eating me alive for so long. I could feel the fight brewing inside me, like the dam holding it back was about to burst. Lily was trying to pull Jason away from me, but the more she tried, the more his fury seemed to grow. "I swear to God I'll make you regret this," Jason spat, his eyes wild with something darker than just drunken rage. "You don't get to ruin my life and walk away like nothing happened." His words hit me like a slap. It was the first time I truly heard Jason's perspective, the desperation in his voice, the way he talked about her like she was some kind of possession, some prize he couldn't bear to lose. For a split second, I felt a flicker of something, maybe pity, maybe guilt, but it was gone just as quickly as it came. What about me? What about my life? Hadn't I been the one who was betrayed, who was left to pick up the pieces of a shattered marriage? I was about to say something, anything, but before I could, Jason lunged at me, fist swinging. I didn't even think. My body moved faster than my mind, ducking to the side and grabbing a nearby bottle from the counter to defend myself. It wasn't even a conscious decision, it was pure reflex. Jason's punch came too fast, and I barely dodged it, feeling the wind of his fist grazing past my cheek. The bar erupted into chaos. I swung the bottle, not even caring about the mess I was about to make. It wasn't a clean hit, but it was enough to send Jason stumbling back, a sharp crack sounding as the glass broke against his shoulder. He yelped in pain, and for a brief second, the room fell silent again. And then, it happened. Jason's hand shot out, grabbing my throat with a force that nearly crushed my windpipe. His grip was tight, unrelenting, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. I could feel the panic rising, but I was too shocked to do anything. My vision blurred at the edges, the pressure on my throat making everything spin. Lily screamed, but I could barely hear her over the rush of blood in my ears. My hands went instinctively to his arm, trying to pry his fingers away, but they were like iron. Jason's face was twisted in rage, his breath coming in heavy pants as he snarled at me. "You think you can ruin my life and walk away like nothing happened?" Jason's voice was a low, guttural growl. "I'm gonna make you pay for this." My head was starting to spin. Everything felt distant. The voices, the pounding music in the background, even the pressure on my neck, it was all fading. And then, just when I thought I was going to pass out, I felt a hand on Jason's arm. It was Lily. She was pulling at him, screaming at him to let go of me, but he didn't listen. He just tightened his grip, and I could feel my breath growing more and more shallow. But then, in a burst of adrenaline, something inside me snapped. With everything I had left, I shoved Jason off of me, throwing him off balance long enough to break free. My body hit the ground with a thud, but I didn't care. I gasped for air, clutching my throat, trying to fill my lungs with oxygen. Lily was standing over me now, her face pale and frantic. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" I didn't answer at first. I was too busy trying to focus, to get my bearings. I had never been in a fight like that, never felt that kind of fear in my life. But I had to admit, there was something almost freeing about the rage. It wasn't healthy, it wasn't the right way to handle things, but damn it, it felt like I'd finally had some control. Jason was on his feet now, his face red and his fists still clenched. His breath came in short bursts as he glared at me. "This isn't over," he spat. "You've crossed the line. You've made your choice, and now you'll pay the price." Lily's face was twisted in regret and fear. She stepped in between us, pushing me back, her voice shaking. "Jason, please. I don't want this. This isn't worth it." But Jason wasn't listening. He turned and stormed out of the bar, leaving behind a trail of destruction in his wake. Lily stood there for a long moment, her body trembling. She turned to me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Relief? Shame? Maybe a little of both. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I didn't want any of this to happen." I stood up slowly, wiping my hands on my jeans, trying to calm my racing heart. Neither did I. I should have left right then. I should have walked away, gone home, and put everything behind me. But I didn't. Because deep down, something had changed. The lines had blurred. And now, everything was spiraling out of control. I wasn't sure of who I was anymore, or what I was even fighting for, but I knew one thing: I couldn't stop. Not now. The chaos wasn't over yet. In fact, it was only just beginning. The bar was eerily quiet after Jason stormed off, the weight of the fight lingering in the air. I was still trying to catch my breath, every part of me buzzing with the adrenaline that hadn't quite worn off. Lily's hands were trembling as she reached out to touch my arm, her expression conflicted, like she didn't know whether to comfort me or apologize. I'm so sorry about all of this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted you to be caught in the middle. This is my mess." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure how I felt anymore. I wasn't even sure if I was angry or relieved or confused. One thing was certain: I couldn't pretend this wasn't happening. No more games, no more pretending like everything would just magically get fixed. Rachel, Jason, this affair, I was wrapped up in all of it now, and I wasn't sure how to get out. I gave a half-hearted shrug, trying to mask the turmoil swirling inside me. "It's fine," I said, though I knew it wasn't. None of it was fine. I don't know what to think anymore. It's a mess." Lily's eyes softened, but she seemed like she was searching for something in my face, like she wanted to say more but couldn't find the right words. She took a step back, like she was giving me space, but her gaze never left me. "I'm not in love with Jason," she said quietly, as if it was something she had to say aloud to make it real. "Not anymore." I blinked, not sure if she was talking to me or to herself. "Then why? Why am I still with him?" she finished for me, her voice quiet but full of uncertainty. She shook her head. "I don't know. I guess I stayed because I didn't know what else to do. He was familiar. But with you, it feels different." Her words hung in the air like a confession, and I wasn't sure how to process them. This wasn't some simple case of a rebound. There was something deeper, something raw and unspoken between us. But I wasn't the kind of guy to rush into things, and I wasn't about to ignore the fact that she had a life, a husband, who was probably somewhere out there, seething with anger. As much as I felt a pull toward her, something that felt real, it was also dangerous. A silence stretched between us. I was still catching my breath, and the last thing I needed right now was to be drawn into something that could hurt both of us even more. But Lily wasn't giving me any space to retreat. "I don't want to be with Jason anymore," she said again, more forcefully this time, almost as if she were trying to convince herself. "And I'm sorry about everything. About the lies, about all of it. But I'm not sure what else to do." My heart twisted a little. I wanted to feel sympathy for her. She was clearly in a toxic relationship, trapped in it. But at the same time, I couldn't just ignore the fact that she had made her choices. She had been with Jason while she and I had crossed a line. I wasn't exactly blameless in this situation either. I'd allowed myself to get pulled in, to find comfort in someone who wasn't my wife. I pushed the thought of Rachel aside. She wasn't in this moment with me. She wasn't standing here, in this bar, with Lily. And even if she had been, I wasn't sure it would have mattered. I was tired of feeling trapped. "I don't know, Lily," I said finally, my voice rough. "This is all a mess. But maybe I need to take a step back. Think things through. I don't know." Her face fell, but she nodded. "I understand," she said softly, stepping back a little, giving me the space I needed. Her eyes were full of regret, but there was something else in them, too, a longing. Maybe for something more than just the life she was currently stuck in. Before I could say anything else, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see the bartender standing there, an older guy with a gruff expression. "You all right?" he asked, eyeing the wreckage from the fight, broken glass, spilled beer, a table knocked over. His gaze flickered between me and Lily. "You need anything?" I shook my head. "No, I'm good," I muttered, still processing what had just happened. "Just trying to figure things out." The bartender seemed to understand, and without saying anything more, he turned and went back behind the counter. Lily lingered for a moment longer, her eyes searching mine like she was trying to find a way to fix everything. But there was nothing to fix. Not right now. "I don't want you to think I'm just using you or something," she said quietly, her voice almost pleading. I care about you." I swallowed hard. I wasn't sure what to say. "I know," I replied, my voice hoarse. "I care about you too. But this is complicated. We're both complicated." Her lips pressed together in a tight line, but she didn't argue. She just gave me a small nod before turning away. "I'll let you go then," she said, her words soft but laced with something heavy. I wanted you to know." She left the bar before I could say anything more, and I watched her go, feeling an ache in my chest that didn't make sense. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Should I be relieved? Guilty? Angry? All of the above? I leaned back against the bar, trying to make sense of everything. Rachel. Jason. Lily. It was all too much. And then, in that moment, it hit me. Everything I had been dealing with, the frustration at work, the strained marriage, the betrayal, it had been building for so long that I hadn't noticed the moment I crossed the line. With Lily. With Jason. With everything. I wasn't just stuck in a bad marriage. I was in a battle, a fight with myself, with my choices. But the worst part? I didn't know who the hell I was fighting for anymore. But one thing was for sure. The chaos was only just beginning. The days after the fight at the bar felt like a blur. I'd gone home that night, barely able to keep my eyes open. Rachel wasn't there. It was like she'd known something had changed, had known that whatever was left between us had finally snapped. Her absence felt louder than any argument we could have had. I spent the entire next day in a haze. My mind kept returning to Lily, to her words, to that look in her eyes. She wanted something more, something real. But the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. There were too many moving pieces, too many lies piled up on top of each other. And Rachel. God, Rachel. But I couldn't stop thinking about her. Lily, I mean. Her sadness was different from mine. It was raw, desperate. Like she had been waiting for something to give her an out, a way to escape. I had been in that position once, years ago, before everything had settled into the mundane routine of a bad marriage. Back then, I thought that if I just kept working, kept doing what I was supposed to do, things would get better. But they didn't. I'd gotten up the next morning, made coffee, and sat on the couch with my phone in hand, scrolling through work emails, pretending to be productive. I couldn't focus. All I wanted to do was call Lily, see if she was okay, make sure she didn't think I was running away. But I didn't. I couldn't. By the time the weekend rolled around, I knew I had to face Rachel. I had been avoiding her for days, hiding in the apartment like a coward, as if I could ignore everything by shutting myself off. But avoidance wasn't an option anymore. When I finally saw Rachel that evening, I was still reeling from everything that had happened in the past few days. She came in through the front door, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her face was pale, eyes dark from lack of rest or maybe from something else. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, watching me like she was waiting for me to speak. "Where were you?" I asked. My voice was flat, too flat. I had no energy left to pretend. She flinched, just barely, but didn't answer. Instead, she shrugged off her coat and hung it on the hook by the door. "Out," was all she said, her tone defensive, like I didn't have the right to ask. "Out?" I repeated, almost incredulous. "Out with who? With him?" Rachel's eyes narrowed, and for a second, I saw the wall she'd built around herself snap into place. "What is this, David?" she snapped, her voice sharp and cutting. "Are you accusing me of something? Of being unfaithful?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. I wanted to scream, to tell her everything I had learned, to confront her with the truth. But I couldn't. My throat was dry, and it felt like the air around us was too thick to breathe. I couldn't go down that road yet. Instead, I stood up from the couch, running a hand through my hair in frustration. "You don't get it, do you, Rachel? I'm not accusing you, I know." Her eyes widened in confusion, like I had just said something unthinkable. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice unsteady, but with a certain edge to it that told me she was starting to panic. I looked at her, finally meeting her gaze directly, my voice low but full of emotion. "I know about Jason." She froze, her breath catching in her throat. I saw the flicker of guilt in her eyes, the way her lips tightened, but she said nothing. "You don't need to explain anything," I added bitterly. "I figured it out." Rachel shook her head, as if she didn't know how to respond. The silence between us felt suffocating. Finally, she spoke, her voice a little shaky. "David, I didn't mean for things to get like this. I never planned it. It just happened." It felt like a slap to the face hearing her say that. It just happened. Like I wasn't standing there, living and breathing and doing everything I could to make our marriage work. I couldn't believe I was hearing this from her, the same woman who had blamed me for everything wrong in our marriage, for not supporting her enough, for not being the man she needed. And now she was telling me it just happened. That she hadn't meant for it to happen? I wanted to scream, but I just stood there, feeling the sting of betrayal rise up in my chest, burning its way through my bloodstream. I finally found my voice again, my words sharp. "I'm not your fucking backup, Rachel. I'm not here to clean up your mess. And I'm sure as hell not going to pretend like I don't know what's been going on behind my back." Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off before she could say anything else. "I'm done pretending. You want to be with Jason? Go ahead. But don't think for a second that you can make me the villain in this story." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care anymore. I had tried so damn hard for so long to be the husband she needed, and it had never been enough. She'd chosen him. She had chosen Jason. "I'm sorry," she whispered, but her voice was hollow, lacking the sincerity it should have had. "I never wanted to hurt you." I shook my head, disgust welling up inside me. It doesn't matter anymore. Without saying another word, I turned and walked out of the apartment. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay there with her anymore. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, the weight of it all pressing down. I had no idea where I was going. My feet carried me toward the bar, the one I'd gone to the night everything had exploded. As soon as I stepped inside, the familiar hum of the place, the low murmur of conversations, the clink of glasses, felt like the only thing keeping me from completely losing it. I wasn't sure what I expected by coming back. Maybe I just wanted to lose myself in the noise, in the anonymity of it all. But as I made my way to the bar, I saw her again. Lily. And this time, it felt different. This time, I wasn't just the guy trying to fill the hole Rachel had left. This time, I was just broken. Looking for something to put me back together. She saw me, too, and I could tell that she wasn't sure whether to approach or just let me be. But the moment she saw the look on my face, the same one I had worn when I first walked in here weeks ago, she stood up and walked toward me, as if drawn by some invisible force. And this time, I didn't push her away. I didn't question my choices. Maybe we were both just too broken to care. And that was when it hit me, this was how I was going to take back control. I had already lost everything. But there was something about Lily that made me feel like I wasn't completely lost yet. I didn't care if it was messy. I didn't care if it was wrong. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to alive again. And maybe, just maybe, that was the worst decision I could have made. I don't know what I was expecting that night at the bar, but it wasn't for Lily to just walk up to me like that, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and something else, something deeper. Her hand brushed my arm as she sat down next to me, and I could feel the electricity between us, like we were both on the edge of something we couldn't back away from. "I didn't think you'd come back here," she said softly, her voice almost teasing, but there was a weight behind it. I didn't know how to answer that. She was right, I shouldn't have. But I wasn't exactly in a state to make rational decisions. I had left my apartment, left Rachel, and had come to the one place where things felt different. Things felt possible with Lily. I didn't really have anywhere else to go, I muttered, staring down at my drink. Lily tilted her head, her lips curving up into a slight smile. She was studying me, and I couldn't tell if it was because she was concerned or if she was just enjoying the drama of the situation. "Well, you're here now," she said, taking a sip from her own glass. She was dressed in that same form-fitting black dress from the other night, but tonight, there was something more in her eyes. It was the same vulnerability from before, but it had a sharper edge now. I couldn't decide if I was drawn to it or repelled by it. The conversation flowed in a quiet rhythm, the kind that feels like it could go anywhere or nowhere at all. She asked about my work, about Rachel, but I found myself dodging every question that threatened to reveal too much. The truth was, I didn't want to think about Rachel anymore. I didn't want to think about my marriage falling apart. I wanted to lose myself in whatever this was with Lily. When she smiled at me, a real, unguarded smile, I felt something stir inside me. It wasn't love. It was something else, something dangerous. Maybe it was the excitement of knowing that we were both trapped in our own lies, that we were two people who could destroy everything and still find solace in each other's company. But I wasn't thinking about that at the time. I wasn't thinking about consequences. All I could focus on was her, the way she leaned in just a little closer, the way her lips parted slightly as she spoke. "I don't think Jason would be happy to know I'm here with you," she said softly, as if testing the waters. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my composure. "Maybe he wouldn't," I replied, a dark edge creeping into my voice. "But I'm not sure I care anymore." Lily's expression shifted slightly, as if she was processing my words, but before she could say anything, I cut in. "What about you, Lily? Do you care?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced away, her fingers tracing the rim of her glass. I could tell she was thinking. I could tell that part of her wanted to pull away, but part of her didn't. She wanted something real, and for some reason, she saw it in me. And that scared the hell out of me. "I don't know anymore," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Maybe I'm just trying to forget everything for one night. Maybe I'm just trying to find something, anything, that feels right. I wanted to tell her it wasn't right. That we were both just caught up in something that could ruin us. But the words didn't come. I was just as much a part of this mess as she was. We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of our unspoken thoughts hanging in the air. I didn't want to be the guy who ran away from difficult situations, but that's exactly what I was. I wasn't ready to face my problems. Not yet. And Lily, she wasn't ready either. I looked over at her, seeing the fragility in her eyes, and I found myself drawn to her again. This wasn't just about the physical attraction. It wasn't just about the affair. It was about two broken people who couldn't face their own truths, so they clung to whatever they could. Then, suddenly, as if something snapped inside me, I stood up. Come with me, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. She blinked in surprise, her eyes wide. What? I wasn't sure what I meant. I wasn't sure what I wanted. But in that moment, I needed to do something, anything, to stop the spiral of thoughts in my head. I needed to feel like I was in control of something, even if it was just for a few minutes. Come with me, I repeated, more forcefully this time, my voice low and urgent. Let's get out of here. It's just... I can't be here right now. She hesitated, looking uncertain, but then she nodded. Okay, she said, standing up slowly. And just like that, we were outside, stepping into the night air, the cool breeze hitting my face like a slap. But as soon as I was away from the bar, away from the noise and the distractions, I realized what I had done. I had just pulled her into this. I had just pulled us both into something that had no way of ending well. But it was too late. As we walked down the street, I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. What was I doing? Was I looking for answers, or was I just avoiding the truth? We reached her car, and she slid into the driver's seat. She didn't ask where we were going, and neither did I. There were no questions, no words to fill the space. The night felt heavy, as though every decision we made would be felt tenfold. But I couldn't stop myself. I had already crossed that line. And there was no going back now. The next few days were a blur. I didn't want to admit it, but I was caught in something that felt so alive, even if it was just a mess of bad decisions and broken pieces. Lily and I kept in touch. Not in a passionate, whirlwind way, but in a quiet, intense sort of way. The kind where either of us could figure out what we were doing, but both of us were okay with it for the moment. The more I saw of her, the more I started to unravel. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, something happened that turned everything upside down. I saw Jason. It wasn't planned. I didn't know he'd be at the same bar that night, and I certainly didn't expect to see him sitting with another man, someone I didn't recognize. I caught the briefest of glances as I walked into the bar, and I knew instantly. He was staring at me. And just like that, the world tilted. Jason's gaze pierced through the crowd, locking onto me with a cold intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. My heart beat faster, like it was trying to break free from my chest. I wasn't ready for this, not tonight, not now. But there he was, sitting at a table across the bar, watching me like he knew exactly who I was and what I had been doing. I tried to ignore him, to pretend like I hadn't seen him. But I couldn't. He was like a shadow looming over everything, and I could feel the weight of his presence in every inch of the room. Lily must have sensed my tension because she looked up at me, following my gaze. When her eyes landed on Jason, something flickered in them, a brief recognition, like she'd seen him before. I could see her tense up too, though she tried to hide it. "David?" she said, her voice soft but sharp with concern. "What's wrong?" I shook my head, my throat dry. "Nothing," I muttered, though the lie didn't convince either of us. I could feel the tension tightening between us, an invisible thread being pulled taut. Jason wasn't just a name anymore. He was a person. He was real, and he was here. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that I was overreacting, that it was just some coincidence. But as Jason got up from his table and started walking toward me, my stomach twisted into a knot. It wasn't a coincidence. He was coming for me. "Stay here," I told Lily, trying to mask the panic in my voice. "I'll be right back." I wasn't sure why I said it, why I felt the need to push her away when all I wanted was someone to help me through this. But I knew what I was facing now, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for the confrontation. I stood, my legs feeling heavy, like the weight of everything, my marriage, the lies, the affair, the secrets, was too much to carry. As Jason got closer, his steps deliberate, there was no mistaking the anger in his eyes. This wasn't just an accidental run-in. No, he knew exactly who I was, and he wasn't happy about it. I tried to stand tall, to hold my ground, but my hands were shaking. When he reached me, he didn't say a word at first. He just stood there, his jaw clenched, his fists balled at his sides. There was a moment of silence, and I could feel the air between us crackling with tension. It wasn't even a verbal threat, it was like he was daring me to say something first. "Jason," I said, my voice low, barely above a whisper. "What's this all about?" His lips curled into a tight, mocking smile. "You don't know, do you?" I frowned, confused. "Know what?" He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "You really have no idea, do you?" he repeated, his voice laced with venom. "You think you're the only one caught up in this game, David?" I blinked, my mind racing. "What the hell are you talking about?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow step back, his gaze sweeping over the room, then back to me. He seemed to be calculating something, like he was choosing his next move carefully. "I think you do know," Jason said finally, his voice low and almost taunting. "I think you know exactly what's going on." My stomach dropped. My mind scrambled, trying to piece things together, but nothing made sense. This wasn't just about Rachel, not just about our broken marriage. Something bigger, something darker, was at play here. "What are you talking about?" I repeated, my voice rising in frustration. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" Jason's expression hardened. He didn't answer immediately, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. "I want you to understand," he said finally, "that you're not the only one who's been lied to. And you're certainly not the only one who's been used." I took a step back, confusion still clouding my thoughts. "Used?" I asked, my voice cracking. He didn't answer directly. Instead, he stared at me with this intense, unblinking gaze, as if daring me to connect the dots. I was still trying to process what he was saying when everything clicked. I couldn't believe it at first. But the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Jason wasn't just Rachel's lover. He was Lily's husband. The pieces fell into place like a jigsaw puzzle I'd been blind to all along. I thought Jason's presence at the bar was a coincidence, that it was just a random encounter. But it wasn't. This whole time, Lily and Jason had been connected, had been living in this twisted web of lies, betrayal, and manipulation. And I was tangled up in it. I didn't know how to respond. My mind was screaming, but my mouth wouldn't move. All I could do was stand there, staring at Jason, the weight of the truth settling in like a lead anchor in my chest. "You," I began, my voice trembling. "You're married to Lily?" Jason's smile widened, a cruel satisfaction flickering in his eyes. "Yeah, I am," he said coldly. "And I know about you and my wife. I know everything." The realization hit me like a freight train. The affair, the broken trust, it was all connected. I wasn't just some stranger to him. I was a part of his own twisted revenge. And as I stood there, frozen in disbelief, the full extent of what I had done began to sink in. I had walked into this mess without even realizing it. And now, I was standing at the edge of something that I wasn't sure I could control. Jason's gaze flickered toward Lily, who had been watching us from across the room, her face a mixture of guilt and fear. And then, just as quickly, his attention snapped back to me. "I'm going to make sure you regret this," he said, his voice quiet but dangerous. "Both of you." For the first time in a long while, I was truly afraid. As Jason walked away, leaving me standing there with my mind reeling, I realized something even more terrifying. The worst part of it all wasn't the affair itself. It wasn't even the betrayal. It was that I had no idea just how far Jason would go for revenge. And I had no idea just how much danger Lily and I were in. The weight of Jason's words echoed in my head long after he left. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of everything. My pulse was racing, my stomach twisted in knots, and my thoughts were spinning. Lily had been Jason's wife all along. The woman I'd been sleeping with, whose touch had felt so different from Rachel's, so full of untapped desire, was married to the man I had been wondering about for days. It all hit me at once, the unspoken tension between us, the strange way Jason had been watching me from across the room, the cold, deliberate way he'd approached me. It wasn't just a confrontation, it was a warning. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, pushing its way through my ribs. I needed to find Lily, to understand what was going on. But the bar felt like it was closing in on me, the noise of laughter and clinking glasses fading into the background as I stumbled toward the exit. When I stepped outside into the cool night air, I barely registered the streetlights, or the occasional passing car. All I could think about was the mess I was in, and the mess I'd dragged Lily into. I dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, but my voice was shaky, and I didn't even know what I wanted to say. I wasn't even sure what I was asking for anymore. "Lily, where are you? Please. I need to talk to you. I think we need to talk about this. Call me back. Please." I hung up, frustrated, pacing along the sidewalk. I couldn't just let this go. I couldn't walk away from this, not now. If Jason had his way, it wouldn't just be the end of my marriage, it would be the end of everything I knew. I pulled out my phone again, scrolling through my messages. I had no idea what I was doing, but part of me was desperate to fix things, to know if there was any way to get ahead of the situation. I needed answers, but what I had was only more questions. I thought about Rachel, about how far I'd drifted from her in the last few months, how disconnected we had become. There was a time when she was the center of my universe, but now, all I could think about was Lily. But even that wasn't right. I didn't know who I was anymore. I stood there for a while, trying to breathe, trying to find some kind of clarity. But there was nothing. Just a heavy fog of confusion and dread. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Lily. "Meet me at the park. We need to talk." It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me moving. I didn't think. I just ran. The park was nearly deserted, the silence hanging in the air like a thick blanket. The streetlights illuminated the path, casting long shadows, and I walked through them, my footsteps quickening as I neared the bench where Lily was sitting. She was staring straight ahead when I approached, her posture stiff, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't look up when I sat beside her, and for a moment neither of us said anything. We just sat there in silence, the only sound the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. "Lily," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on? Why didn't you tell me?" She turned her head slowly, her eyes bloodshot, as if she'd been crying. Her face was pale, her expression guarded, but there was an unmistakable sorrow in her eyes. "I didn't know how," she said, her voice cracking. "I didn't know how to tell you the truth." The truth. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth at the word. "About Jason?" I asked, my voice rough. Lily nodded slowly. "Yes. About Jason. About everything." I couldn't bring myself to say it, but the words were on the tip of my tongue. "Why did you do this to me? Why did you get involved with me when you knew what kind of man Jason was? Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning?" But instead I just sat there, my fists clenched at my sides, waiting for her to continue. "You have to understand, David," Lily continued, her voice so quiet that I had to lean in to hear her. "I didn't know what to do. Jason, he's not who you think he is. He's not who he pretends to be. And I'm trapped. Trapped." The word hit me like a brick. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her as more than just the woman I was having an affair with. I saw someone who had been manipulated, someone who was caught in a situation she couldn't control. She wasn't some villain in this story. She was just another person, trying to survive in a mess that was far bigger than either of us. But it didn't change anything. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely a whisper. If you knew who I was, if you knew about Rachel and everything that had been happening, why didn't you tell me about Jason? Why did you? She cut me off, her voice suddenly sharp. I didn't want to hurt you, David. I didn't want to drag you into this. But I needed to. I needed someone who wasn't a part of it, someone who could make me feel real again. You gave me that. But now, I'm just making everything worse. Her words hit harder than anything Jason had said to me. This wasn't just an affair. This wasn't just about cheating. This was about people who were so broken, so trapped in their own lies, that they couldn't see a way out. We were all just pawns in this game, and none of us were safe. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I wanted to say something, to tell her that I understood, that maybe we could figure this out together. But the truth was, I didn't know how. All I knew was that this whole thing was spiraling out of control. And Jason was the storm at the center of it all. Just as I was about to speak, a sound from behind us made me freeze. A car door slammed. I turned quickly, my heart racing. There was no mistaking the figure walking toward us through the dim light. Jason. Jason's figure loomed in the distance, a shadow stretching across the darkened path. My heart skipped a beat, and every instinct in my body screamed for me to run, to get away. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Lily's eyes widened, and for the first time since I'd met her, I saw pure fear flash across her face. She stood up abruptly, her body tense, like a deer caught in headlights. Jason, please, no, she whispered, but her voice barely carried over the sound of his heavy footsteps. Jason didn't say a word. He just kept walking, his eyes locked on me, filled with a fury I couldn't ignore. He was taller than me, broader, and there was something almost animalistic in the way he moved. The closer he got, the more I realized just how much danger we were in. Lily stepped forward, but Jason raised his hand to stop her. Stay back, Lily, he growled. This doesn't involve you anymore. She flinched, stepping back reluctantly, her eyes darting between us. Jason, please. Don't do this. But Jason wasn't listening. He was already standing in front of me, his face twisted with anger. You think you can just waltz into my life and take everything I built? He spat, his voice low and dangerous. You think you can just take her away from me? I stood my ground, but I could feel the weight of his rage bearing down on me. I'm not trying to take anything, I said, my voice strained. I didn't know. I didn't know about you, about this. Jason laughed bitterly, the sound almost crazed. You think that makes a difference now? That you didn't know? You're just as much a part of this as she is. You're both pieces of the same filthy puzzle. It's too late for regrets, David. I clenched my fists, the adrenaline coursing through my veins, but I didn't know how to fight back, not like this. Jason wasn't just angry. He was unhinged, consumed by something darker than just betrayal. I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't here to have a conversation. He was here for retribution. Lily took a few hesitant steps forward, her voice pleading. Jason, please. We don't have to do this. This isn't. He turned on her so fast that I didn't even see it coming. One hand shot out, grabbing her wrist in a vice-like grip. Her breath hitched as she gasped in pain. You stay out of this, Lily, he growled, his voice low and threatening. This is between me and him. I took a step forward, instinctively, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I couldn't stand by and watch him hurt her. Let go of her, Jason, I said, my voice trembling but firm. You're not going to do this. Jason's eyes shifted to me, dark and dangerous. The grip on Lily's wrist tightened for a split second, but then he let go. He shoved her back, not gently, but with enough force to send her stumbling backward. She gasped, but she didn't fall. I could see the fear in her eyes. I could see that she knew exactly what Jason was capable of. I knew it too. Jason took a step toward me, his chest heaving, his fists clenched tight. "You don't understand, David," he spat. "This isn't just about Lily or you. This is about everything. About who owns her. About who owns this life we've built." I was shaking now, my thoughts clouded by the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I didn't know how to handle this situation. I didn't know what I was supposed to do when everything was already so out of control. I opened my mouth to say something, but before I could, Jason lunged. His fist collided with my jaw with a sickening crack. The pain exploded through my skull like fireworks, and I stumbled backward, my legs barely holding me up. My vision blurred for a moment, but I managed to catch myself before I fell. The world spun around me, and I tasted blood in my mouth. Jason didn't stop. He was already moving, coming at me again, faster this time. I barely had time to brace myself before his fist connected with my stomach. I gasped for air, the wind knocked out of me, my knees buckling. I heard Lily shout something, but it was distant, muffled by the pounding of my heart. Jason didn't care. He was already pulling me up by the collar of my shirt, shoving me against the nearest tree. "You think you can just take my wife away from me?" he snarled, his breath hot on my face. "You think you can just steal what's mine without facing the consequences?" My head was spinning, but I managed to push back against him, using whatever strength I had left. "She's not yours, Jason. Not anymore. You lost her a long time ago." His face twisted in fury, and before I could say another word, he slammed me back into the tree with enough force to rattle my bones. "You don't get to tell me anything," he hissed, his grip tightening around my throat. "You have no idea what I'm capable of." I could feel my vision darkening, the edges of my sight blurring, and for a moment, I thought I was going to pass out. But then, in a last-ditch effort, I brought my knee up into his gut. Jason grunted in pain, loosening his grip on me just enough that I could break free. I gasped for air, staggering back, my legs unsteady. Lily was standing off to the side, her eyes wide with terror. She didn't move toward us. She didn't scream for help. She just watched, paralyzed. "You're crazy," I spat, trying to catch my breath. "You're out of your mind. What the hell do you want from me, Jason?" His chest was heaving as he glared at me, his knuckles white from gripping the tree. "I want you to suffer, David. I want you to feel the same pain I felt. I want you to know what it's like to be betrayed. To be used." He was breathing heavily now, his anger simmering just beneath the surface, ready to explode again. But something was different. The violence in his eyes, the way his body trembled, it wasn't just rage anymore. It was something far more dangerous. It was desperation. I took a step back, trying to put distance between us, but I knew deep down that I wasn't safe. Not here. Not with Jason. And just as quickly as it started, everything stopped. Jason let out a harsh breath, his anger still simmering, but he didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me, as though trying to decide whether to finish what he started. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. I stood there, gasping for breath, my heart hammering in my chest. The world around me was spinning, everything a blur. I couldn't think. I couldn't process what had just happened. Lily stood next to me now, but there was no relief in her eyes. There was nothing but fear, and a sense of finality that neither of us could ignore. And in that moment, I realized the truth I had been avoiding. There was no going back. Everything I had done had led to this point, this fight, this betrayal, this mess. Jason wasn't just angry anymore. He was dangerous. And I was in his sights. And no matter how hard I tried, I was never going to be free of him. Bye.